all of the mean and hateful things that I was so sure everyone was going to say. And that is one of the most powerful lessons I learned about sharing your story, is that the opposite thing happened. I got on and there was so much love. And not only love, I got hundreds of personal messages that were like, thank you for sharing your story. I've been through something similar and I've never told anyone. Thank you for saying it out loud. Thank you for sharing it. I don't have the courage to. So thank you for being the one who does.
In our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, we discuss a variety of sensitive subjects such as suicide, suicidal ideation, self-harm, abuse, and faith crisis. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to our podcast, Hearing the Unheard, Stories of Transformation, presented by Pause Wellness. I'm your host, Eric Stauffer, and we are pleased to welcome our guest today, Robyn Homer.
Thank you for having me.
So glad to have you, Robyn.
I'm happy to be here.
Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about you and your life.
All right. One of the most shocking factors is I am one of 12. I'm number 11. I've got one little brother, both the same parents. Grew up in Newton, Utah. Good old Newton, population, I don't know, 600, 800 maybe. It's probably more now, but yeah, I grew up in Newton, very sheltered life, as you can expect in a small little town, right?
Did you ever fish in Newton Dam?
No. Once. I did not like it. I was not a fan.
The tiger muskie fame there. The
Is
fish.
it?
Oh, yeah. Some
I don't.
big fish in
Are those
Newton
the one
Dam.
that nibble on you when you
Yeah.
get in?
Yep.
Yeah, I do know you get nibbled when you go swimming there, but no, we didn't really fish much. But I love to be outdoors. Nature is probably my favorite place to be. It's just so calming and healing, and even just stepping outside and hearing the birds, or even just coming here, as soon as I got out of my car, I could hear the birds chirping and the sun was shining, and it's just so peaceful.
It's a beautiful day today.
It is such a beautiful day today.
And it's great to be able to notice when it's a beautiful day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your married, your children.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm married, been married for 10 years to a really good man. He's human, he's flawed, but he's a really good man. He has a good heart. And I've got 4 kids, 9, 7, 4, and 2.
That's great. Keeps you probably very busy.
Very busy. Yesterday was madness. My daughter lost her tooth and we're pretty sure she swallowed it.
Oh, yeah.
Because we couldn't find it anywhere.
That happens.
And potty training things, dealing with all the poop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keeps me very busy. Keeps me on my toes for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. So tell us a little bit about some of your teen years.
Oh, my teen years. I mean, in my mother's words, I was the perfect teen for a minute. Because I have always very much been a rule follower. It was all very black and white. Like, these are the rules. You do not break the rules. Especially when it came to religion, right? Like, I believed to my core that anyone who swore or said bad words was like, you're going to HE double hockey sticks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was very, honestly, very judgmental. And, but I was the perfect daughter who got good grades, did everything right, had a testimony. And I was a very easy teenager up until I met a boy. And then things got interesting.
Yeah. So when you say you had a testimony, that means that you were raised in a Latter-day Saint Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints home.
Yep.
And we're taught with those values and that gospel, the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
And so you felt from a young age that you knew what was right, what was wrong, and were sensitive to those things.
Yes, very.
How do you feel like that testimony was formed at those early ages?
I mean, largely influenced by my own upbringing, by my own parents' beliefs and testimonies. We went to church every week. We were very diligent about going. We were pretty, off and on, but pretty consistent with doing scripture study every morning and family prayer and all of those things. And I did develop my own testimony. Like, I felt very strongly that I knew for myself, even in my teen years, that the church was true. Yeah.
So then teen years, and you said you met a boy.
I met a boy.
You met a boy.
I met a boy. I met a man.
How old were you?
I was 18, just about to graduate from high school. And I was working at Cafe Rio. And this guy walked up to me and just gave me his phone number, and super cool, was like, call me sometime. And I was super flattered. I was also incredibly painfully shy in my teen years and really insecure, and didn't really, I'm not trying to be self-deprecating, self-deprecating, but like, I was an ugly duckling growing up. Like, my braces, like, expander could fit my pinky between my two front teeth, like. And then I, got the braces off, and, like, looking back on it now, I was like, yeah, I was a pretty young lady, but I didn't know it. I was very insecure. Boys never gave me attention. So for a boy to walk up to me and, like, give me his phone number was like, oh my gosh, this has never happened.
Can I ask about that just a little bit? Because having daughters, I've noticed this tendency as well, and not that it's only daughters, and sons experience the same thing, but why do you feel like it was so impactful when you have those feelings of self-doubt or lack of confidence in yourself or your looks or something like that, that we search for that validation in other people?
Yeah.
Why do you think that happens for us so much?
Oh, I can speak for myself, and it was because I held the belief that it was really important for me as a girl to be desired. A lot of times the frame for men is they're the ones doing the desiring, and girls, your job is to be desired. So I just grew up wanting desperately to be desired, to be wanted, to be liked, to all of these things, and I wasn't, because I wasn't as pretty as the rest of the girls, or I wasn't confident like the rest of the girls. I was really shy and uncomfortable in my own skin. So then to have a boy walk up to me and just from my looks alone decide that I was desirable, that was impactful. Yeah. That was a moment that was like, oh my gosh, like, even if no one else can see it, he can see it. That makes him special.
So even now, looking back with perspective, can you see that thinking error, and how would you define that thinking error, and why do you think that thinking error happens? Oh, yeah, absolutely. My brain gets lost lots of questions at a time.
Sorry.
Can you? Yeah.
I just won't be able to
follow. No, that's okay. So do you feel that was a thinking error?
Absolutely.
About desire?
Yes.
And about your role as a girl to be desired?
Yes. And that thinking error led to a lot of hurt in what became a relationship with that boy.
So where do you think that thinking error comes from? I mean, I know there's nurture and nature, but from your experience.
From my experience, definitely the culture. I think it's kind of just in the air that we breathe. I don't remember anyone ever sitting me down and saying, hey, If you ever are going to find a man, then be pretty, be kind, be nice. But it was just something that I knew, and that it was really important to be desirable, to be picked. But the thinking error there was, I'm not the one doing the picking. I need to just make sure to get picked. And I think a lot of that came from, I've since learned 2 different terms. There's reflected sense of self, and that means you're looking to everyone else to tell you who to be in order to be enough, in order to be loved, in order to be wanted. And then there's having a solid sense of self, and that's being able to look out to the world and say, this is who I am. I know who I am, and this is how I'm going to show up. But I was very much living in a reflected sense of self. I was looking at everyone else to tell me, like, am I enough? I don't think I am, but maybe you think I am. And if you think I'm enough, then maybe I can be enough.
Yeah. And recognizing that thinking error isn't to blame oneself for having the thinking error, but hopefully as others can recognize that thinking error, it can prevent others from going down roads that have led to pain.
Absolutely.
Well,
yeah, it's not to look back and hate myself for having that thinking error, which has been a whole process in being able to do that. But I've finally been able to practice looking back and just being curious.
Yeah.
And just asking questions instead of judging 18-year-old Robyn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So tell us what happened next. You get this number and this boy, you felt flattered.
Oh, yeah. And he was, Twilight was huge back then. I was a big fan, read all the books several times, was personally on the hunt for my own Edward Cullen, and I believed I had found him, like in this guy. I had found my own personal Edward Cullen, and I couldn't believe how lucky I was. And part of that was like, he just admired and loved everything about me. And it was so validating. It felt so good. It was almost, even our first kiss was on our very first date. And we were just like sitting there talking, and he just like leaned in and kissed me. And I was like surprised. But then his like following line was like, I'm sorry, I just couldn't help myself. And it was like, oh, I'm so desirable. It was feeding all of my insecurities, every single one. And it was everything that I ever wanted, was for someone to love and admire me that much, because I didn't think I deserved to be loved that much. I had no solid sense of self then. So it was like an empty well that he was filling. And of course that felt amazing. And there were, what I didn't know, I don't know that I even knew the term red flags back then, but there were plenty of red flags. He was 26, in the middle of a divorce. He was a felon. I was still in high school, and just so many red flags. But of course there were all really good reasons for those things, and none of them were his fault, and all those kind of things. And I just believed him. I trusted him, because I didn't have any reason not to. And I think that is, I wouldn't even call this a thinking error, but it was like, a lot of times you just go into life and go into relationships and think, you don't question someone's intentions. You just think you're getting the face value because that's what you're giving.
It's kindness and it's grace.
Yeah. It's like, and I like prided myself on that. Like, well, I'm not judging him, and I'm giving him a second chance. And anyways, all of that is to say that all led to me being in an abusive relationship for 2 years. And I didn't know it was abusive at the time.
Before we get into the abusive relationship, I want to talk about a phrase that you used, because you said you saw all these red flags, but there was this internal, I didn't feel like I deserved love or deserved to be loved. And because this situation made you feel like, oh, that's okay, I'm okay. Why didn't you feel like you deserved to be loved? Have you thought about that?
Yeah. I didn't. That's a really good question. Why didn't I feel like I deserved to be loved? I think because I wasn't what I thought someone who deserved to be loved was. I wasn't confident. I think that was always the ideal in my mind, right? Like, I wasn't the cheerleader in high school. I wasn't the popular girl in high school. I was the painfully quiet, shy. So I don't know that it was like, I don't deserve to be loved. It was like, I don't deserve attention from the opposite sex because I'm not the level of desirable that all these other girls are. I'm just quiet, shy, awkward Robyn. So then to get that attention from a boy was like so exciting.
Yeah. So that reflected sense of self was so strong in you that it actually caused you to feel like this won't ever happen for me.
Oh, yeah.
And then when it did, it just blew all of it out of the water.
Yes. And that's even a part that like came into the relationship was I was so lucky to have him. And that was something that was kind of used against me, was like, you're never going to find anyone else who wants you. Like, you found someone who wants you. Hold on to him tight. And that was an idea that he reinforced too. It was like, you're never going to get as good as me. And I believed it.
When you saw those red flags, did others see the red flags and try to speak up?
Oh, yes.
Walk us through the rationalization process that you went through at that time.
Yeah. So my family definitely saw the red flags. He was 26. They knew he was getting a divorce. And they even knew that he had a felony because that was like public record. So there were, I mean, just those things, right? I'm in high school and I'm dating a felon who's 26 years old, and they were very concerned, obviously. They were also very concerned that he wasn't like an active member of the church. He had been a member but wasn't active. So they tried to, I can see how they were trying to protect me. But just having experienced it on my end, it just pushed me even further into his arms, and I eventually cut off my family. Like, I remember deleting all of their phone numbers, changing my phone number. No one had my phone number because he was in my ear on this side. It was me and him against the world. And that just reinforced this idea. My family trying to take me away from him just made me fight for him even harder. And it was, I mean, I don't know how the abusive people's brains work. I don't know how they construct all the things that they do. It's quite terrifying to think that they do it so easily. But there was just enough of him in my ear talking about how he'd always been abandoned by everyone he loved, and he had always been betrayed, and you know what I mean? Like, all these things that it's like, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to stick around. I'm going to show you the love that no one has ever shown you. Because they very much come from like a victim, you know, their story is just a victim story. And I wanted to be the person who didn't do that to him. So when my family is trying to pull me away from him, I'm like, no, I'm not going to be that person. I'm going to fight for the person that I love. I'm not going to betray him like everyone else in his life has. And yeah, like I said, it got to the point that I just completely cut my family off.
Because they were like a threat to
my happiness.
Yeah, to your happiness.
Yeah.
And also, you were getting another reflected sense of self as a Christian and as a compassionate person, to not be judgmental, to be inclusive.
Yep.
And it felt like others were telling you to not be Christ-like or not be compassionate.
Yeah.
And then he must have loved that protection for him.
Yes, absolutely. And he loved that I was isolating myself. Because if I was really close to my family, very close to my family, and if I didn't have them to talk to, who would I talk to?
Yeah.
No one.
Yeah.
And if they were anti him, then I'm not going to go complaining to them about the things that he's doing to me, because that's just going to make them hate him even more. I'm just going to share the good parts.
Yeah.
Even if I have to twist the good parts to maybe look a little bit better than they are, because I really want them to like him.
Yeah.
So that was something that, knowing what I know from that perspective is like, and my family, I know they love me, and I know that they were just trying to pull me away from something that they saw as bad and horrible, which it was. They were so right. And I wasn't ready to see it that way. You weren't
ready to hear it.
I wasn't ready to hear it.
Yeah.
So it just pushed me even further into his arms and isolated me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is not critical of their efforts, but is there anything that you've learned looking back on it that families could do in a situation like that would be helpful, or was it inevitable?
My family, again, I know that they were trying to help, but there was a lot of guilting that they were trying to do. I even would get texts from people, from friends, like my dad passed away when I was 7, and a friend texted me and was like, hey, like if you continue down this road, because at this point I was living with him and I wasn't married to him. And anyways, this friend was like, if you continue down this road, you're never going to see your dad again. Just like, I think well-intentioned people try to scare you into changing. But really it just hurts. And I believe it's like a form of manipulation to try and get you to change your course. And maybe it will for a minute, but I don't believe true change comes from being manipulated.
Right.
So there were a lot of hurtful texts and things said, I think in an attempt to shock me or scare me into waking up. But again, that didn't work. It just meant, okay, you're out of my life.
Yeah.
And you're out of my life, and you're out of my life. And, oh, look at that. I don't have anyone. I just have him.
Yeah.
It really is me and him against the world.
So their attempts to steer, although well-intentioned, they didn't realize that it made it worse in many ways, because now they're heaping on thoughts of shame, and you're now taking that shame into a relationship that was not healthy for you.
Yeah. And yeah, if I were to tell, I've given plenty of advice to people who have reached out to me like, hey, I can see that my sister's in this relationship that is abusive or really toxic or whatever it is. What do I do? My number one piece of advice is love them and keep your mouth closed until they come to you. Just love them. And if they're not seeing it themselves, it's because they're not ready to see it. At least that was my experience. It took me over 2 years to start to wake up to like, okay, I didn't know it was abusive because he never physically harmed me. But I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I eventually did get out. And even then, I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to about it. And largely, I didn't want to talk to anyone about it. I wanted to just forget about it, pretend like it never happened.
Yeah.
Especially since there was the aspect of me losing my virginity to him outside of marriage. And that was that moment that I lost my virginity to him, everything kind of just spiraled downward from there, in large part because of the thinking errors that I had around that. I didn't know what I know now, but he didn't hold me down, and force me, but I was manipulated and coerced. Like I said, no, I don't even know how many times, until I just got to the point that I was like, okay, he's just not going to let up. So I just let it happen. And I remember sobbing afterwards because it was like, that's it. I'm ruined. It's over for me. And my heart just breaks for 18-year-old Robyn, because for two things. One, she believed that since she had lost her virginity before marriage, that she was literally damned to hell. And two, that she was willing to sell her soul, because that's really what I believed. She was willing to do that to avoid hurting his feelings. And that really says a lot about the errored thinking I had then. And I remember leaving that night, and I was like, okay, if I don't let that happen again, if it just happens one time, maybe, it's a mistake. I only did it once. As long as I don't repeat it, maybe I'll be okay. Maybe I could be forgiven. Maybe a man would want me someday. If I can say, yes, it happened, but it only happened once. But then it happened again. And I remember distinctly thinking after it happened again, that's it for me.
I'm done.
And then it all just snowballed really quickly, because then I was like, what's the point? There's no reason to stop it from happening again.
So you lost hope in a God loving you, in feeling a sense of purity for yourself in the future, and also what you got into the relationship for, which is to be desired in that error, that thinking error. But still, you felt like you had closed all opportunity for that ever happening again with anyone else in a more healthy relationship.
Exactly. It was well, again, it was kind of like another, maybe this could be my saving grace. If I end up marrying him, at least I still only ever had sex with one person.
Right. So then you got to find a way to make it a healthy relationship enough to marry this person.
I've had sex with him.
Right.
Now it's got to be forever.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be my saving grace.
Did you feel like all these walls were closing in on you? I mean, family relationships severed, relationship with God severed. Yeah. And the one source you had left, you knew or were you feeling at the time like, oh, this is not healthy, but I didn't know anything different? Or did you not see that for a while?
Oh, I didn't at all, because everything inside of me was still reflected sense of self.
Yeah.
So if any of my actions he reacted poorly to, it was, okay, what am I doing wrong? Where am I at fault?
Yeah.
I wasn't ever coming from you know what? Yes, that happened. I didn't know how to hold on to my own mind. It was so easy for him to control me and to control my thoughts around everything, because I didn't know how to hold on to my own beliefs, hold on to my own thoughts. It was really easy for him to just get in there and scramble and gaslight, which means to twist someone's reality to the point that they don't understand or know their own mind. And it's really disorienting and it's really confusing. And that's why it was such a key factor for him to separate me from everyone else, because I couldn't go to anyone else and like, okay, this happened and I feel like it wasn't okay for him to do that. But then when I got upset about it, he did this. And they couldn't be like, oh my gosh, no, yeah, you're so right. That's not okay.
Right.
I was just over here in my own head. Like, it's literally crazy making.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, in my own personal definition, this is like, I don't know, official, I don't know, smart person website, but like gaslighting is like crazy making. If you feel like you are crazy and like you don't even know your own mind and you can't even follow your own thoughts and it just feels like a scrambled, jumbled mess in there. Like that was my experience with gaslighting.
And then you hand it over to the person who wants to control it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, before we go further into that relationship, you said something about your family and advice or friends or whoever, and you said that the key was to just love. Mm-hmm. And, in my experiences, it seems as though people are hesitant to love someone when they're in that place of danger, because I don't know if you saw this, but it's like they're afraid that the choice to love that individual means to endorse the behaviors that are toxic for them or painful or wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And so they can't trust it. And if you could go back, I mean, it was such a turning point, right? What would loving you look like in that moment, even though you were in danger?
That's a really good question. I'm going to step to something else real quick that it ties into. I recently heard this phrase that I love so much, and I feel like it's helped me understand what love actually is a little bit more. It's love is the law, not the reward. And I felt like that's kind of the opposite of that was used in that situation. It's like, hey, Robyn, you are living with a man you're not married to. We know you are having sex with him. You're going off the deep end. You've stopped going to church. And because I was making choices that they didn't like, I feel like love was kind of withheld. In a lot of ways. And I think that's something that it's definitely a more natural tendency. Like, you're not doing or behaving the way I think you should.
So I'll withhold. So
I'm going to withhold, even if that means I'm just going to be short with you. I'm going to be grumpy with you. I'm going to be unkind to you. But to love because it's the law, not because it's a reward, to me looks like, hey, I love you so much. I see that. But then looking back at it, they didn't know any abuse was happening.
Right.
They just saw me not following the straight and narrow.
Right.
And they were panicking.
Yeah.
So for me, if I see someone not living the straight and narrow, whatever,
Yeah, whatever that looks
whatever
like.
that looks like to different people, it's like, I'm just going to love them. Yeah. And I'm just going to care about them. And at least my experience was learning that if they were raised in that religion that you're worried about them leaving, they already know everything you're going to tell them. I already knew I was going to hell. I didn't need everyone else telling me, but I was still making the decisions I was making because of all of the errored thinking that was happening. Them coming and shaming me, I was already shaming myself way more than they were.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even changing anything. So if someone had just loved me through it and just been there with zero judgment about the situation and just expressed like, hey, I love you. I want to say like, you're a big girl. I know you can make your own decisions. I was only 18. That is not old.
Yeah. But part of loving is letting go, right?
Yeah.
It's putting the power of agency in the hands of the person making the poor choices.
Yes.
So that they believe they can make that choice
Yes.
that will save them.
Yes. And when they realize their errored thinking, their ego doesn't get in the way as
Yeah.
much as, no, like, I got to prove that this is okay.
The error in my thinking was not an error.
Yes.
And then
because they've been so adamant
That's
about
right.
you're making a big mistake. And it's like, no, I'm not. I'm going to prove it.
Yeah.
Instead of, hey, I'm worried about you, but I trust you and I know you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then maybe 4 months down the line, now I'm not blaming anyone for the
Right.
choices that I made, but there just was, in my mind, so much to prove.
I love that phrase that love is the law, not the reward.
Mm-hmm. It
There's-
changes everything.
Yeah, because there's this, I always talk about this scripture. It's 1 John 4:19 that says, we love him because he first loved us.
Mm-hmm.
And the Savior he's the one who lights the fire of love.
Mm-hmm.
And as we discover his love for us, we love him back.
Yeah.
When we figure out what that is,
Yeah.
right? And if there's a stigma, I wish we could just smash.
Mm-hmm.
It's the error in the caregiver's thinking that loving means endorsing
Mm-hmm.
bad behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we could, that those are not mutually exclusive concepts, that you can love and be there for someone, and it doesn't mean you
Yes.
agree with all their choices.
Yes. And even within my own marriage, right? That's where I've seen this applied in my own marriage and with my kids. Like when my husband's doing something frustrating, or he said he was going to mow the lawn and he didn't, I've started to wake up to like, oh my gosh, I withhold love. I'm irritable with him and I'm grumpy with him. And like, that's a way of me trying to control his behavior. If I withhold this love, then he's going to learn and he's going to do better. And it's like, that's not.
It's not what the
That's
Savior
not-
does, right?
No.
If the Savior's
No.
love is, I'm going to love you, it doesn't mean he ever agrees with all of our choices.
Yep.
But he still chooses to love, and that's what causes us to want to change.
Yes. And
Is
to turn
because
back to him.
We don't feel deserving of
Mhm.
that love. So now, but he still loves
But
me.
he's still, yep.
I'm going to do something about that.
Yes. It makes you feel like you actually can progress and actually
Empowers.
can change. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's expansive instead of constrictive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thanks for talking about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So take us a little further, as much as you would like, about this relationship and how did it,
Yeah.
how are you able to deal with that?
Well, I didn't for a
Mhm.
long time. I left the relationship, and about a year later, I met my husband and we got married. And the extent of what I told him was like, hey, I'm not a virgin. I just think it's important that you know that. Again, I do think it's important that I shared that with him, but I was still coming from the mind frame of like, I'm an old piece of chewed gum. I'm ruined. So you should probably know this before you decide to marry me. And my husband is just genuinely one of the most Christ-like people I know. And it didn't faze him. And long story short, it turned out he already even knew before he asked me on our first date because of, small town gossip.
Mm-hmm.
But that just made me love him and appreciate him even more, that it was like, oh my gosh, he would still go on a date with me knowing that. Like, anyways.
Well, there that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's that love you didn't feel
Mhm.
you deserved,
Mm-hmm.
and it was extended to you,
Yeah.
shocking your system.
Yeah, you're so right. I've never thought about it that way. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But we got married and life was wonderful and blissful. And then we had our first kid and then we had our second kid. And it was kind of getting to the point, like intimacy was just becoming really hard for me. And I was still having nightmares about my ex on a weekly basis, and like nightmares of like just nightmares, horrible nightmares. And I was kind of just confused. I'm like, I'm not in that anymore. I so firmly believed like, okay, that's in my past and that's where it's going to stay, and we're going to bury it, and I'm going to, you know, plant this beautiful garden over it and grow all these beautiful flowers, and my life's going to be beautiful, and we're just not going to think or talk about that stuff underneath there. And I wanted so badly just to keep it buried. And it wasn't working. It was just getting to the point that like even my husband, like coming behind me and hugging me was like triggering. And
why did you want to keep it buried?
I didn't want to think about it.
Painful.
There was so much hurt, and it was also incredibly shameful for me. There was so much shame wrapped into it. It was literally my deepest, darkest secret. I didn't want anybody to know. My husband's family didn't know. I mean, obviously my family knew, but no one in my new life knew.
Yeah. So you felt like this new life, you had a pretty bow on it.
No one needs to know.
Yeah.
No one needs to know. And that was a big part of it because of the whole, if they knew that I lived with a man for 2 years, they're going to put 2 and 2 together, and they're going to know that I lost my virginity before I got married. And they're going to know that my husband's not the only person that I've ever had sex with. So there was so much more shame around that than even the like, yeah, he was a class A jerk, which is all I knew at that point. That's what I would say. It was like, yeah, he was a class A jerk. I didn't know it was abusive. I didn't know anything. I was just like, he was awful. But we're not going to think about him. We're not going to talk about him, because that would bring up the fact that I'm actually a horrible person, and I don't. And that's the thing about shame, is it just like festers in the dark. Brene Brown says if you put shame in a petri dish and shove it in a closet, right, it's just going to grow. It needs dark. It needs quiet. Nobody knows about it. You don't talk about it. And so that's exactly what was happening. So when moments would come up, when my husband and I first got married, his sister was on a mission, and she had like emailed him and was like, hey, I ran into someone that Robyn knows, and he said that Robyn's been married before. And, you know, and Brent showed me, and obviously Brent wasn't like, you've been married, but he knew that I'd lived with him. And yeah. And this like fear, like it literally just like rose up my entire body and just filled me with so much fear, because I was like, his sister can't know. Because if she knows, she's going to tell the rest of the family, and then they're going to know that I'm a horrible slut. That was honestly like I don't want people to know. It wasn't even, I don't want people to think that I am. It was, I don't want people to know.
You'd already defined yourself.
I had already decided that I was, you know, a slut because this had happened. So there was so much shame. Can we talk about
that physiological response? Because I think that's really crucial. We have a fear thought enter in, and then it's confirmed by the physical response that we have. Was it stomach? Was it chest? Was it neck? Like what
it would start in my stomach, like literally like a punch to the gut. And then it would rise up and just fill my entire, like literally all the way to the top of my head. It was just completely all encompassing.
Like your world would completely unravel.
If anyone knew.
So to get rid of that feeling, got to hide it more.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
I kept it a secret for a long time, and it was really having a big enough impact on my relationship with my husband, to the point that I had like a breakdown. We were at a marriage conference, and the homework was like to go home and be intimate, and I had a breakdown, and I started like bawling, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I just can't. And he was like, that's fine. We don't have to. And I was like, but I know we're at a hotel and I didn't have any of my normal like safety excuses.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were at this marriage retreat and our kids weren't around and we had a hotel. And because of all of these expectations or beliefs that I held, I thought I had to.
The pressure was high.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're in another situation of do something you don't want to.
Mm-hmm. And that had just been escalating over time. And anyways, it was after that breakdown, like we went back to the hotel and just talked about how maybe it was time that I went and saw a therapist. So I went and, called my insurance. Who do you cover? Just went to the first guy. And unfortunately, it confirmed all my worst fears about therapy. I was worried about going and just digging up all this old stuff and then having it just make things worse. And that was honestly kind of my experience. It was really awful. And my thought then was like, okay, I guess therapy's not for me. And it was also really discouraging because it was like, well, I thought that was going to help, but actually made things worse. And now I guess this is just our life now.
So there was a fear all along the way to go to a therapist because you assumed that it would make it worse.
It's like one of those things that you just really want to believe. It's the phrase that I use all the time is like, I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd rather just continue being fine than go dig up all the crap from my past and have even the 5% chance that maybe it makes things worse.
Yeah.
Because I don't actually, like our brains would rather live on a well-known path, even if it's painful, than a new path. Because the new path is unpredictable.
Yeah.
And that's really scary for our minds. So that's exactly what my brain was doing was, you know what, this is hard, but we're dealing.
Yeah.
We're managing.
Yeah.
Let's just keep going here. And sure, you don't want to be intimate with your husband. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
That wasn't actually my belief. I held a lot of guilt around it and a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's
almost like we don't realize that either way is hard and we're just choosing which hard.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it's the harder hard.
Yes,
it's the more difficult
often
one.
Choosing the more difficult hard.
Because we're too afraid of what we don't know.
Yes.
We don't know that there might be healing on the far side of that complexity.
Yep. And we hold on firmly to I'm doing well enough. Maybe I'm not thriving. Maybe I'm not super happy. I'm fine. And I look for that word all the time now when people are like, I'm fine. And I'm like, there's so much in your life that maybe you want to be different, but maybe you're not sure how to go get it or sure how to change it, or you're just really scared to, or maybe a combination of all the things.
Mm-hmm. So did you retreat from therapy?
I did for about a year, but then that's when I actually decided to share my story on a blog. I actually just felt really impressed and inspired to, and I fought it for a couple of months. I was like, what? You want me to share on the internet my deepest, darkest secret? Are you kidding me?
Who are you referring to as you? You want
God.
me to? You felt it was a prompting.
Yeah. Yeah. I felt pushed even. Like, you need to do this. And I had a life coach at the time. And so I was like working kind of through it with her. I was like, I feel like I should do this, but that seemed, at that time, it was like, that would be stupid to do that. Then everyone would know. And again, it's that shame piece. It's like, it's literally been my worst nightmare because don't you understand what would happen if people knew? And so there was a minute I was like, you know how sometimes you get promptings and you're like, okay, I'll do that. But I'm going to kind of edit it to do it in a way that feels a little bit more safe. In my head, I was like, okay, I'm listening. I'll start a blog, but it's going to be anonymous. I'm not going to share my name. I'm not going to share who I am. I'm going to edit out any details that could point to me. And then it was like, okay, but how is anyone going to know about this blog? Mm-hmm. How is anyone ever going to see this? And anyways, I eventually just took a big step of courage and just shared a little bit of my story and basically aired out my dirty laundry for the world to see. And I remember posting it and literally feeling a vulnerability hangover, like felt sick and like I posted it. It's there. It's on the internet. I shared it on my personal Facebook page. And then I just like didn't get back on for a couple of days because I was like, I didn't want to see my worst fear come true. I didn't want to get on and see all of the mean and hateful things that I was so sure everyone was going to say. And that is one of the most powerful lessons I learned about sharing your story, is that the opposite thing happened. I got on and there was so much love. And not only love, I got hundreds of personal messages that were like, thank you for sharing your story. I've been through something similar and I've never told anyone. Thank you for saying it out loud. Thank you for sharing it. I don't have the courage to. So thank you for being the one who does. And it was, I mean, at that point, it was very validating because I still needed that validation. And I'm at that point, that's what I needed. If the response had been a bunch of judging and shaming and hateful comments, I honestly don't know what that would have done to me because I didn't have a solid enough sense of self to be able to step out and say, hey, this is my story and this is who I am. And it doesn't matter what you think of me because I know what I think of me. I'm in that place now, but I wasn't then. I was still very fragile. But there were so many people, and I continued to share more and more things on my blog and share what I was learning as I was going to things and learning things, reading books, and it was incredibly healing for me. And it was also, for the first time, helped me see that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only person who had been through something like this. And there were so many other women out there who had been through something very similar, but nobody talks about it because there is this thought like, I'm the only one. And so I can't share it. Yeah. Otherwise I'll be judged.
Yeah. And there it is again. You anticipated that you wouldn't be loved, that you would receive a very negative response, and it was the opposite. And that endears you to those people.
Yes.
It's like you had your own walls that you had created of stigma and shame, and you kicked them down as hard as you could.
Yeah.
How did you get that courage?
You feel the fear and you do it anyways. One of the things my mentor had told me is there are two different kinds of fear. And a lot of times we wrap them all up into one. We think, fear is what keeps us safe. And we think that it's keeping us physically safe. And she's like, no, there are two different kinds of fear. There's fear that kills. Like, yes, don't go walking in the forest in the middle of the night. Like, that fear that comes up there is a literal
protection.
Like protection. Your life could be in danger. But then there's another kind of fear that's the fear that grows. And if you're stepping into that fear and acting in ways that scare you, but you know that it's not actually going to kill you, then it's going to grow you.
Yeah.
So that was the mindset that I had to take into that was, okay, I'm going to post this. Is it going to kill me? No. Like, telling someone this is not going to kill me. I'm not going to kill over dead. Nothing's going to happen that's going to kill me. Is it going to grow me? It sure as heck is going to grow me. And it did.
That is so powerful. The silence just harbors the pain. And when we find safe, appropriate, correct outlets,
Yeah.
we invite healing in.
Yeah.
I've shared this on our podcast before, but one thing that's always stuck with me is this concept that the only way out is through.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you kind of exhibited that, right? Where you were like, I'm going to keep this buried. I'm going to put flowers on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my way out of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was self-deceiving because you couldn't see the healing that came through going through it and facing it head on.
Yes. Yeah. Have you ever heard what buffalo do in a storm versus cows? When a storm comes, the buffalo turn and they face the storm head on, and they just walk through it, knowing that if I face the storm head on, they're going to get through it faster.
Oh, yeah.
But cattle, they turn and they try to run away from it, which just keeps them in the path for so much longer. So that's something that I'm like, I'm going to try and be a buffalo. I'm going to turn and I'm going to face things, because I tried to run away from a long time, and that kept me in the pain for so much longer than if I had just turned and decided to face it.
That is amazing. I love that imagery.
Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, there's lots of really great explanations of it that did a lot better of a job than I just did. So go look
great.
it up.
You did great.
It's
I want to buy a poster of a buffalo just like going in the storm.
Yes.
That's inspiration.
Yep.
That's great.
Yeah.
In closing, I know there's so much more you could share. And
actually, can I share one more
please
thing
do,
real
yeah.
quick? I don't want to leave with like, I tried therapy and it wasn't for me and it was garbage, so don't do therapy.
Right.
The type, I've since learned there are so many different types of therapy, and obviously so many different therapists. Thankfully, I did end up trying a different type of therapy and a different therapist, and that helped immensely. And then I moved on to another different kind. Like, I've done lots of different modes of therapy, seen lots of different therapists. So I just want to say, if you've tried therapy and your worst fear was confirmed, like it was for me, that doesn't mean therapy is not a good fit for you. It just means that therapist maybe wasn't a good fit for you. And I hate to think where I would be if I had never tried again, because it actually has helped heal me so much.
Yeah.
So
I totally agree. I think if a therapist has ethical medical integrity, they want their patient to find what will work for them.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we have a mismatch. It's no different than medication, right? Sometimes the wrong prescription didn't work, and it doesn't mean we give up on that. And therapy is no different at all.
Yeah.
And with us at Pause Wellness, we hope if it doesn't work with one of something we provide, we hope we can be a means to find it for someone in another avenue through some other source to get healing, because healing is the goal.
Yep.
That's great. Thank you for that clarification.
Yes. Did not want to end with
No, that's great. That's great. So in closing, we've got so many potential listeners to your story. If you were to summarize the tools and the tips and the vision of hope you want to create for them, how would you sum that up to express to them? What do you want them to walk away with?
There are so many things, but more than anything, a message of hope. I can't even tell you how many years I felt hopeless, and like the damage that had been done was damage that would just kind of run my life forever. So the message I want to give is, one, don't give up. If you haven't found healing, I believe healing is out there. I don't believe in a God who puts us here on this earth and puts us through the human experience without ways for us to heal. There was even a point that I had a therapist tell me, like, you know what, I think we've done all the healing that you can do. And it felt like we had barely scratched the surface. And I was like, no, I refuse to believe that. So I went and found a new therapist and kept trying and kept healing. And now, 8+ years into my journey of actually facing the storm, I can say that I've found healing. I'm still human. I'm still flawed. There's still hurt. And I don't know, that there won't ever be some level of hurt, but I have found so much healing. And honestly, a lot of that healing has come from being willing to look at my part in it. Did I deserve to be abused? Absolutely not. Was there anything that I did to deserve the treatment that I got from him? No. And I did have a part in it. A lot of times, and my belief then was I left the abusive relationship, so I'm leaving everything behind with it. But the patterns come with us.
Mm-hmm.
You may have left that, but the patterns came with you. The patterns and the ways that you know how to be in relationship with other people, they come with you. And maybe you're not in an abusive relationship anymore, but you are still in relation with other people in a way that is hurting you and not giving you the results that you want.
Oh, that's so helpful. We often talk about neuroscience and how when we do have thinking errors, we pave neural pathways.
Mm-hmm.
And so although we may disrupt the system by getting out of that abusive situation,
Yes.
those neural pathways are still there.
Yes.
And the only way to face the storm is to create new neural pathways.
Absolutely.
And it takes time and wrestling and pain. And
Yep. And it really does. It takes being willing to look at yourself and own up to your part in it. I think that's a disservice that's done for a lot of women who were in abusive relationships, is we just hear the message like, you didn't deserve that.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't deserve that. You were a victim. You didn't deserve that. And while that's true, there's a sense of powerlessness in it. And like, how do I protect myself? I didn't know how to protect myself then. Does that mean it's just going to happen again? And there are a lot of women who are terrified to enter relationships because they're like, well, if there was nothing I could do to stop that, then there's nothing I can do to stop it from happening again. And what I want women to know and understand is that's not true. You need to address your errored thinking. You need to look at it. You need to look at the things that you were doing within the abusive relationship that kind of kept the cycle running. And when you're willing to look at that, though it's painful, that it's gut-wrenching, it sucks, but it's growth. A lot of people like to pretend that they like to think that they like truth, but oftentimes truth is more painful and harder to look at than our egos would like to admit.
as you know, it takes great courage. And as you've
Tremendous
clearly
courage.
demonstrated to us, we are so thankful for the courage that you've had. I can just see hopefully there are so many women who will be able to listen to this and find that courage that they need to be like the buffalo in the storm.
Yep.
And empower their own lives with help
Absolutely.
and love and hope and healing.
I hope so too.
Well, thank you so much, Robyn. We just really appreciate you being with us today.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We express our gratitude to Robyn for her willingness and vulnerability in this interview that we've just had with her. She has helped us understand the concern and the danger in many ways that can happen from thinking errors of wanting to hide or to suppress things that need care and need help, and that there are resources out there, that the thinking errors that we experience about what people must feel about us or the assumptions that we make about what others will or will not feel towards us can actually lead us down paths that bring more pain and more conflict in our lives. But when we take those courageous risks to share and to reach out to people that we know do love us and want what's best for us, we find healing, we find acceptance, and that love empowers us to believe in ourselves and to believe that we can be that same thing for other people. Thank you so much, Robyn. We appreciate your story.